Have you ever tried to start a new habit and you realize that, wow, this is really hard and takes a lot of energy and focus and attention? If you haven't worked out since high school, how hard is it to start working out again? Probably pretty hard. Those first few days hurt in lots of ways, mentally and physically. Now, how hard is it to brush your teeth every morning? Probably not too difficult. The reality is, it's actually not any harder to work out than it is to brush your teeth. The only difference is this: one is a habit and the other is not, at least not yet.
Last week, we covered the attitude of focus, and today we're going to talk about the behavior of habits. Before we start, as always, I like to define what that word is. So let's define habits. Habits are regular repeated behaviors or routines that are performed automatically, often without much conscious thought. But how do we get to that point where it is done without even a conscious thought? They're formed through consistent repetition and become ingrained in our daily lives over time. Consistent repetition over time. There's no cheating to creating a habit. There's no cheat, there's no loophole, there's no one to come help you create a habit faster.
No one can do it for you.
And no one could do it for you. It requires repetition and time. A habit is created, it necessitates reinforcement. And habits actually work in a cycle. They work in a cycle of 3 parts: cue, behavior, and reward. A cue is the trigger that initiates the habit. So for example, like you mentioned the gym as a habit, the cue would be, I'm not feeling well in my body, I need to get moving. That would be the cue. So if you're catching the drift of this first part, habits are usually formed because there's a need. So after the cue comes the behavior, and the behavior is the repetition part. It's the habitual action. So if you go to the gym, the habitual action would be putting on your workout clothes, getting in the car, and going to the gym. That would be the habitual action. Last part of that cycle is the reward. So this is the piece that reinforces the behavior. That reward might be after you're done working out, you get a good sweat and your endorphins start to increase. So you're feeling really good. And that by default is the reward that then reinforces the original habit. Just like anything, there could be positive habits and there could be negative habits. Positive habits are those that will improve your life. They improve your well-being, your productivity, or even your health. Negative habits, on the other hand, are ones that will affect your life in a negative way. They cause physical, emotional, or spiritual harm. For example, procrastination, overeating, or complaining.
And yes, procrastination and complaining are both habits.
Some people wouldn't think that because they're so common or they just kind of slip out here and there.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, those are things that do start with a cue. They start with a behavior and they start with a reward.
Yeah.
Because even procrastination, overeating, or complaining can have a reward. It may feel good to complain. It may feel good to overeat. So it rewards the original behavior and reinforces a negative habit.
I know for me, I struggled with years for procrastination. And then I realized that it was because of a dopamine addiction. My procrastination outlet was scrolling. And I always thought, oh, wow, yeah, I must be getting something out of the scrolling. But it wasn't that. I was actually just filling the time. Because for me, I perform great under pressure when my back is against the wall, when there's less time that I need. And I get such a rush from that last minute deadline and trying to hit it that I didn't realize that I was creating those situations in my life. That, you know, if I had an abundance of time to be able to complete a project or do a task, I didn't really get anything out of doing it
On time.
It was only when, you know, my back's against the wall and I needed to deliver that I would get this dopamine rush. So it wasn't that I was getting anything out of scrolling, but it was that I just needed to kill time until I could feel that rush. And that was a habit that I had to break. I had to, because obviously that's not a healthy thing.
Right.
You know, a lot of my work was late or not excellent because I was doing it last minute. So that's something that I really had to unlearn.
And when you had discovered that habit, you really sat with yourself and became so self-aware about something that you noticed because you recognized it was a negative habit. And something that's important to note is that habits don't just pop up in our lives. They don't just happen naturally. Positive habits take an attitude of focus. Negative habits, on the other hand, they might feel like they pop up a little bit more naturally. And typically it's because they're rooted in something. And so like Derek, it's important to take a minute to pause and ask yourself, before you try to break that habit, where is this habit coming from? What is it linked to? What is it rooted in? So take the time to discover that before you try to break the habit. Because if you break the habit, but you don't discover the root, there's a high likelihood that the habit will reform again at some other point. So again, just take that time to really process where it's rooted. Habits ultimately shape our lives because they determine where we spend our time and how we achieve our goals. There's a common idea that is always associated with the concept of creating habits. And this idea is that it takes 21 days to form a habit. I'm sure you've heard this. I'm sure people have told you this. I'm sure that you know people who have even tried this. After 21 days, I have now formed a new habit. I did it for 21 days. But I'm here to tell you that that is a myth. Dr. Philippa Lawley from University College of London.
Is that what it's really called?
Yeah, it is called that. She did a study and she discovered that it actually takes 66 days to form a habit.
Interesting.
And knowing what we know about psychology and the brain, we know that when you're creating a habit, you are forming new neural pathways in your brain, and those neural pathways take time. So in the study, it actually says that it takes 66 days for the habit or behavior to become automatic. And I like that word, automatic, because like brushing your teeth. Brushing your teeth is automatic unless you're dirty and you don't brush your teeth. But if you aren't dirty,
Brush your teeth, y'all.
brush your teeth. But something like that is automatic because I'm sure you've been brushing your teeth longer than 66 days. And lastly, there's 4 parts of a habit that I want to point out. Number 1, complexity. There's simple habits and there's complex habits. Simple habits are things like drinking water every day or brushing your teeth. Creating those type of habits actually take less time. Complex habits, like the example that Derek shared at the very beginning, like working out, take more time to form because they require more effort. Number 2, consistency. Repeating the same habit in the same context strengthens it faster. Number 3, motivation. Having strong personal reasons for why you are developing this habit can also speed up the process. Number 4, environment. A supportive environment with few to no distractions or barriers can help habit formation.
So now that we have the foundation of what habits are, here's some practical tips on how to master the behavior of forming new habits. Before I get into the tips, I want you to picture yourself a year from now. Now, you probably already have in mind things you want to start and stop doing. I want you to see yourself a year from now and picture and ask yourself, what would my life look like then if I started today? At that point, if I've been working out for a whole year, what does my life look like? If I stopped smoking, or if I stopped lying, or if I stopped whatever it is for a whole year, I haven't done that behavior in an entire year, what does your life look like? That's the motivation that Alexis was talking about. And that is really the foundation, because developing habits aren't easy. So you have to have a why that's strong enough to get you through those initial moments of developing these new behaviors. So here's 4 tips for you. Number 1, start small. As Alexis said, the lower the complexity, the easier it is to start developing these new habits. And here's the truth of it. Any habit, regardless of how complex it is, can be broken down into smaller habits. I first started working out again. My goal was not to work out every day. My goal was simply this: every morning, put on my running shoes. I didn't have to run. I didn't even have to go outside, but I was just developing the habit of putting on my running shoes. And once that was a habit, then I could add to it. I could then have the goal of put on the running shoes and step outside for 5 minutes. And that brings us to tip number 2, stack them. It is a whole lot easier to add a habit onto an already existing habit than it is to just add it into your life at a random time. Let's say you want to add the habit of flossing into your life. It's a lot easier to add that habit if you do it right after you brush your teeth. If you want to start taking vitamins, it's a lot easier if you have them laid out, ready to take right after your meal. With habits, you don't want to just remove or add a habit into your life. You want to replace it. If your goal is to stop binge eating, it's very hard to just X that out of your life. It's a whole lot easier to replace it. You already have the habit of going to the cabinet at 10:30 p.m. and looking for a snack. So instead of just trying not to do that, replace the snack.
And something that's a little bit deeper, and I know that there's a lot of people that do struggle in this area, is the area of pornography. Pornography watching or masturbation is a habit. When we have clients that struggle in these areas, we don't just tell them to stop and not replace it with something else. When we look at the habit of pornography watching or masturbation, there is this dopamine rush that they get from it. So in order to replace that habit with one that's going to stick and make sense, we have to find another one that's going to give them a dopamine rush. And that's not scrolling on their phone, but rather working out, maybe doing an intense workout, and that becomes the replacement. Do that long enough, that becomes your habit replacement for the habit that was negative.
It's called hacking your brain, or habit hacking as I refer to it. Tip number 3, develop a short-term memory. Now, I tend to be an all or nothing person. I'm pretty intense, especially with myself, and I have very high standards, and I can be my own toughest critic. I remember when I wanted to develop the habit of reading on a daily basis. And I would set out, I'd heard that 21-day myth, and I said, okay, for the next 21 days, I'm reading every single day until I developed a habit. And I would read for about 14 days, and then I would miss a day. And instead of saying, okay, I missed a day, let me just restart tomorrow. And, getting to the end of that 21 days and saying, okay, I read 19 out of 21. I would read those 14 and stop and never pick up a book again. Now, that might not look that big in the span of 21 days, but expand that to the course of a year. Having short-term memory means that, maybe you read a book 300 out of 365 days. That's missing 2 days a month. That's a whole lot better than reading for 60 days in a row without missing, but then missing one day and giving up on the whole thing. So develop short-term memory with yourself. Every day is a new day, and you're developing a lifestyle. That's what habits are. It's developing a new lifestyle. It's not about the streak.
And it's kind of like this fast. For 21 days, you have committed to doing this. You've committed to not eat from 6 to 6. And if there was a day that it was a tougher day, you gave in, you had a snack, you don't just stop the fast. You just pick up where you left off the next day and you just keep on going. And that is truly having grace for yourself and not being your own worst critic and not being harder on yourself than God is.
Last but not least, tip number 4, do it until it's reflex. So start small, stack them, and develop a short-term memory with yourself as you create and master the action of creating new habits. God bless.
Happy fasting.